Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anand Rao. I'm a faculty member in Communication and Digital Studies and also director of our Center for AI and the Liberal Arts. And one of the goals of our center is to promote discussion and debate about AI in society. And on that note, we're really pleased to have today's speaker. Sean O'Brien is somebody that I've known for quite a while. He was an undergraduate student here, class of '09. I remember when he was a student and president of the student body. And I remember we were talking as we were walking over across campus, remembering when then Senator Obama was on campus and when Governor Palin came by for 2008, all while Sean was here as an undergraduate, and a lot of great experiences. Sean did tremendous work when he was here as an undergraduate, and he's done even more impressive work ever since, and continually giving back to the university community. And I'm so appreciative of all he's done to be supportive of the center, and in particular, to serve this year is our inaugural AI expert in residence. Not full residence. He didn't really move here full time, but he will be here. And he's been here electronically and now in person now. And then at the end of the semester for some of the research projects that we'll have. He had a chance to meet with the Provost Council earlier today and met with some faculty members who were doing some work with students on an AI project. And so pleased that he's here to give this talk, Preparing for the Storm, Leadership in an Age of AI Acceleration. So thank you so much for being here. Let me turn it over to Sean, and when he's done with his talk, we'll open it up for questions, and we look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Sean.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rao, and thank you all for coming. I appreciate your time and your attendance, and it's deeply humbling to have the audience here and have the opportunity to come back and speak with you all today about AI. What I want to do before I jump in is really two things. One, I want to get a sense for who's in the room, because you show up, you think you're going to give a talk, but I want to make sure it's something that you all find valuable. And then secondly, give you a little bit of background about me and what brings me here beyond what Anand shared. So from a starting point, just show of hands, if you'll humor me, how many people consider yourselves in this room, you're AI experts, you use it every day, you consider yourself proficient? All right. 1.5, 2. All right. We have a modest risk. You're sort of average users. All right. Majority of them haven't used it yet or just scratched the surface. All right. So we have a pretty good distribution. So I hope there's something for everyone in the talk, and certainly we'll plan to leave some time. We'll leave some time for questions as we go through as well. So I want to tell you just a little bit beyond what Anand shared about me and my journey to be here today talking as the AI expert in residence, which is still humbling to say. I graduated the University of Mary Washington in 2009. I worked here for several years in the university's IT department. I went into the private sector working at a marketing technology firm and was very excited about the opportunity to work in the private sector, and then had an opportunity to go back to an organization called Internet2, which is the National Research and Education Network in the United States, which focuses on delivering technologies for research universities, national labs, working alongside corporate partners. And that has really given me the opportunity to develop a national perspective on emerging technologies, but particularly AI. One of the things I come back to being with you here today, Anand was talking about how we were walking around campus and talking about things that have happened. There's a really interesting deja vu moment for me here, being back here today, thinking about when I graduated in 2009, we were at the height of a financial crisis. There was concerns for students graduating. I think for those in the broader economy, how are we going to get jobs? What were the jobs going to be? Things felt fractured. Things felt uncertain. And the reason I share that is because of the vibes. The vibes feel very similar to how they feel today, in that we're in a time of change. We're in a time of some systemic change that we probably don't control. And we're in a time when the economy is going to change. So as I get prepared to give this lecture today, I want to give you some context of how I developed this, because it colors the type, which is preparing for the storm, leadership in the age of AI, acceleration. So I put this talk together earlier than I prepared papers or speeches or other assignments when I was a student here. Jeff's laughing. Some of the faculty here can attest to that. Anna, you were very nice to say I did great things here. I think in a previous time when we were talking, I think it was that I did great experiential learning while I was at the university. And I'm going to argue today that has never been more important than it is today, with some of the changes that AI is bringing about. But when I put this talk together, when I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about, it was in a week where we started to see the SaaS apocalypse. And if you're familiar with the SaaS apocalypse, that is really the decline of software as a service, tools on, the NASDAQ or S&P 500 or wherever they're listed. The value of those companies started to drop as people thought, hey, AI may displace some of the services that these provide. It was the same week that Block, a company run by Jack Dorsey, who's a tech founder, laid off about half of their workforce. And he cited AI as a principal reason that they did not need those jobs anymore. I actually started this on the same day that the Secretary of War labeled Anthropic, one of the leading AI models, as a supply chain risk, when they could, as it's been widely reported, not agree to an understanding about the use of AI for autonomous weapons or mass surveillance. So a lot of churn in society as it relates to AI. And that's where I came up with the title of this lecture, as Preparing for the Storm. For me personally, AI has always been a very exciting frontier technology. While like many people, I've had concerns about the environmental impact, job impacts, how it impacts our thinking, and our ability to think and work through problems, I've been very excited about it. But something about these stories started to shape my worldview that there's a storm coming and we need to think about how we prepare ourselves. So today I'm going to talk through thinking about how we prepare ourselves for the change that AI is going to bring about as individuals, as institutions, and particularly as institutions, thinking about institutions of higher education, liberal arts institutions like the University of Mary Washington, and then society as a whole. There was an essay I read. It's a widely quoted essay a couple of weeks back that was written by Matt Schumer. Matt is a technology founder, and his central premise of his essay was, if he really shared what he thought about what was going to happen with AI, his friends and family would think he lost his mind. And that was a feeling that resonated, and that essay resonated with me. And I think it resonated with many others who work in technology. Some of what we think is coming, some of what we think is on the horizon and coming soon is going to be a profound societal change. Matt likened this to the COVID moment. If you knew COVID was going to happen in January or February 2020, and you told your friends, hey, it's a good idea to stock toilet paper, they might think you're a little bit crazy. And what I'll say here today is, I think the impacts that are coming may sound a little bit scary, may sound a little bit crazy. Part of, as I talk about them today, is to be thought-provoking. It is to get you thinking. But I do think some of these impacts will happen. And I think the more we can begin to prepare ourselves, our institutions, and our society as a whole, the better off we'll be. But unlike the COVID-19 pandemic, this is not all about doom. I think there's opportunity for immense goodness in AI, breakthroughs in medicine, in science, in efficiency, um, in the ability for individuals to have agency, to do self-creation in ways they have not had before. So I think the key is, how do we build skills? How do we foster our own agency? And how do we accelerate change? And that's what I'll be talking about today. So as I've touched on already, but I think it's a key point that bears repeating, what is so interesting and so maybe different about AI versus other technologies is speed, is the speed of change. Technology revolutions are not new. We've all lived through them. Humanity's lived through them, whether it's the printing press, the telephone, the internet, a smartphone. What's different about this one is it's moving faster than previous revolutions. So if you look at the acceleration gap, thinking of some of the last sort of big three technology changes that have impacted all of us, in the time it took these technologies to reach 100 million users, it took the internet 7 years. It took the smartphone almost as long, in 6 years. It took ChatGPT around 2 months to reach 100 million users. So I would argue that the defining characteristic, the defining thing that we need to remain cognizant of in this moment is not actually AI. It's the speed of change and the speed that change is impacting our society. That acceleration creates a gap. Institutions, whether they're universities, whether they're corporations, whether they're governments, tend to move slowly. They tend to move deliberately with thought. They tend to move linearly. But this technology is moving exponentially in a way that other technologies have not. And the gap between the speed of technological change and the speed of institutional response, that's where we find ourselves, in that danger zone. That's where friction lives. That's where instability will come from. And I think, unfortunately, it's where we find ourselves today. So whenever a technology storm arrives, the question becomes, how do we navigate it? This afternoon, I'll talk, as I've shared before, about the storm and navigating it in 3 layers: as an individual, as an institution, and as society. So let's start with the individual. Thriving in the AI era. So over the past couple of years, I've had a really unique opportunity to watch organizations and individuals experiment with the use of AI in the United States and really across the world. That includes universities, corporations, research labs, even local governments, to understand how these systems may change the way we work. And like many of you, I experimented myself. In the beginning, the very beginning, I think I used these services maybe as a replacement for Google. I have a question. What's the answer? I noticed one of the things I've talked about before, speed, right? The speed to that output was dramatically increased. My ability to get the answer that I was looking for was much faster. That was interesting. It was convenient. It's where many people are, I think, still today, but it's not the major leap. The major leap for me, and the major leap for most individuals, comes when you recognize the ability to use these services to create, not to answer a question. For me, in a work context, that could be drafting a blog post. It could be writing a position description. It could be summarizing a long document. It could be taking a whiteboard and notes, and even audio and translating it into a really robust meeting summary. At the time, it could even be basic data analysis, parsing information, summarizing patterns, helping me think through problems. But then I got to the moment that's more transformational, and I hope it's the moment you all get to, which is the moment of production. And as models have rapidly improved, AI continues to evolve, and the ability to build grows exponentially. Whether it's designing a car, I was telling a story the other day that, like many of you probably in Northern Virginia are familiar with, the house behind me was knocked down. They cut down all of the trees. And I decided I need to do something different in my backyard. I drew the measurements, went to Google's Gemini as an AI model and said, I'd like you to help me plant a garden. I want seasonal interest. I need some height, but skinny trees, because I don't have a very big backyard. Here are some plants I like, but I'm not stuck on them. Come up with a planting plan for me. And it did. And then I took it to the next level, which is create an image of it. Show me what it would look like in my backyard, along a fence line, with these various plants. And I got the image. And you can see what that would look like. And it becomes an iteration, a different kind of iteration of thinking through, what do I want to create? How does this design something for me? That's what I want, and helps me figure out and understand and design what I want. I think that production, I'll talk about it often in a work context today. I'll talk about it often in a teaching and learning context today. But I think that production, that ability to produce something for yourself that solves a problem, that helps you think through, that allows you to create, maybe even have some fun. I think that becomes the transformational use of artificial intelligence. So one of the other big changes for me as an individual that I would encourage you all, those of you who said, hey, we're learning, we're trying this, it's new, we're evolving in it, is the multimodal nature of AI. If you think about, people talk about their ChatGPT moment. When's the first time you used this chatbot? That was a very text, question, answer, help me build something experience. When you think about today, the multimodal nature of these tools, it's very easy to go, and I do this all the time, walk my dog and have a conversation with ChatGPT while it produces something for me. It's very easy to take video and parse a transcript out of it and use that transcript. Things like Notebook LM will now create videos or podcasts based on context and conversation that you feed it. The multimodal nature of it as an individual, the ability to consume information the way in which it works best for you, I think is transformational for all of us, hopefully as lifelong learners. I don't think you show up to a talk like this if you're not a lifelong learner, unless someone made you come. I won't ask for a show of hands. I won't ask for a show of hands on that one. But for learners to be able to consume information in the way it's best for you, I think that's transformational, both for people, but particularly thinking about an institution like Mary Washington, a liberal arts and sciences institution. How does that empower the student? How does that empower the faculty member to be able to consume information in a way that best resonates with them and their learning style? I think that's fairly transformational. So what I would posit about AI here today, and maybe one of my most important realizations that I've had, and maybe one of the positive things I would encourage you to think about as you think about the future of AI as individuals, is I don't think AI flattens experience. I don't think AI negates experience. I don't think it limits the human experience. I think it amplifies it. The way I look at it, the way I've seen it in business or even in some of my own use is this: good project managers become better project managers. That skill does not go away. It amplifies, it supports. A good project manager may use AI to draft project plans, track progress, summarize meetings, analyze risk. But the skills that make a good project manager, communication, the ability to resonate and connect with a team, the ability to spot risks and patterns, that some of those are uniquely human and some of those are very well augmented by something like generative AI. Similarly with good developers. Good developers increasingly may manage small armies of AI coding agents. Their job may shift from writing every line of code to designing systems, supervising outputs, validating results, and really acting as system thinkers To me, I think that's empowering. So AI doesn't eliminate experience, it amplifies it. But there's a challenge with that amplification. And it's something I've started to personally experience. So in the past year, working alongside AI tools, I was more productive than I've ever been. More output, things I would never get to on my to-do list, all of a sudden are a 3-minute prompt to get to an output that would take me an hour or two. Break time between meetings, going on a walk, driving back from dropping my kids off at school. All of a sudden what I do have my phone. I have a handy friend right at my phone that I can talk to and say, you know what I need to do? I need to write that report. And here are the key points I want. And some of these models and services have gotten so good and so connected into enterprise data that we have that it'll pull the data in to support my opinions. If I prompt it right, it'll challenge my opinions. Sometimes you want to do that for reports. Sometimes you don't, if we're just being honest about it. But what I found is that as the AI models got better, as my use scaled, as particularly I started to use a tool from Anthropic called Claude Cowork, which is a multi-agent management tool, I was exhausted every single day. I was getting more done. I felt like I wasn't working as hard. Yeah, I was so exhausted. And it's the context switch. A veteran software engineer named Steve Yagi, who's quoted on this slide, who worked at Amazon and Google, gave this phenomenon a name. He called it the energy vampire effect. He compared that to working alongside Colin Robinson in the TV show What We Do in the Shadows. Does anyone know that TV show? Okay, I don't. Many of you do. That's great. That's why I had to look at this and read it. I was like, I don't know what that show is.
It's really good.
All right, there we go. Now I know what to do. So, it's an energy vampire that drains people in the room. And Steve's argument was, this is true of AI as well, that AI removes the natural friction from the work. We were talking in a group earlier today, about, I don't work any less because of AI. My output's better. That's what someone said. Someone in this room. One of the things we talked about is it removes the friction. When you're having a chat, voice, text, however you do it, with someone on your phone or your computer, that's maybe a more relaxing experience. It's maybe more of an experience as humans we traditionally associate with leisure, chatting with someone, asking questions, learning, having that natural human interaction, yet we're working. And I think for many people who are forward-looking AI users, they've really driven into that productivity. So you start to look at productivity is getting to 10x. You're seeing this massive gain in productivity, but the human is still 1x. And we're starting to, and I'm guilty of this, both for myself and others, overtaxing the human. There are a couple of ways to look at the future of AI. One is we have less people working. They're managing these armies of AI agents. They're working very hard. The other is, and I think both of these will be true, by the way. The other is you're sitting on the beach, hanging out, chatting with your AI agent, telling it what to do while you're hanging out at the beach. I think some people will do that. That's a goal. Couple students here, maybe. That's a goal. You want to be the person at the beach. But I think that will be a select view. And I think as AI moves faster, it helps people to work through complexity. Unfortunately, the expectations are only going to rise. And there's an emerging body of research that talks about this. I believe there's a MIT business report. I'm talking about a Berkeley Haas business report that examined how AI changes the nature of work. And what they found is that AI changes the nature of work across 3 dimensions. You have the faster pace, the marginal cost of starting a task. I talked about doing this in the car or on a dog walk, or just, oh, I have this idea right before I go to bed. Let me make sure I get it out on my phone. The marginal cost of starting a task, getting something to start, is near zero. In fact, one of the things I've recently experienced and I've done, and I would advise not to do this. Meredith, I would advise not to do this. Meredith works with me. Is using Claude Cowork, using this multi-agent tool to line up all the things I didn't get done during the day and have it try to work on it while I go to sleep. It's a very cool concept that your agents are working for you while you're sleeping. In reality, you don't really go to sleep because you start stressing about it and thinking about work. And, I don't think they do that good of a job anyways, particularly with things like that you forgot to do and that you're doing at 10 p.m. when you're tired. So one is faster pace. The second is the broader scope. One person all of a sudden managing and using AI can be the marketing department. They can be the contracts department. They can be the accounting department. You can bring in all of these skills and body of knowledge to do baseline work in so many different fields, particularly if you understand your business, particularly if you understand your consumer base or your audience. And you can really magnify yourself in that workforce in a broader scope. However, there's more taxing context switching when you think about, oh, I'm working on a marketing problem. Now I'm working on a coding problem. And now I'm going to switch to drafting a position description. That's a lot of context switching. So while you're able to go broader, you're able to do more, that context switching does have a real cost. I jumped ahead. I went off my lecture notes. It happens, I think. And talked about the extended hours already, but that it's just so very easy to start something, or when you wake up in the morning and it's like, oh, I forgot to do that, to get right on your phone and do something, and the output is good enough that it solves that challenge. I think it ends up making people work many extra hours. It actually reminds me in a lot of ways, we talked about the COVID-19 pandemic, of something I think that played out with remote work as well, which is when you're not going into the office, you lose that break. I'm not saying people's commutes to work were necessarily enjoyable, but it's certainly different than waking up, pouring a cup of coffee and sitting down at your laptop and starting to work. And I think we're seeing that phenomenon play out again. I think I at least learned, and I think others, and the research backs it up, that was not necessarily a good long-term idea for productivity, that the productivity gains actually weren't there. They were in the short term, like a lot of productivity gains, but in long-term, as a long-term perspective, they led to burnout. And I think that's happening here. One of the things on the flip side, that I think is generally pretty fascinating about this moment, though, is that the more powerful this technology becomes, the more it reduces the barrier, the more that things are faster, the more that you're able to work from a broader scope, the more valuable human skills actually become. I talked about some of them earlier: communication, leadership, judgment, empathy, the ability to read the room, the ability to motivate people, the ability to frame a problem correctly. We traditionally call those soft skills. I know we don't call them soft skills at Mary Washington. I learned that. I learned that earlier today. But those skills may become the most valuable skills. And my thesis, my belief, is those become the hard skills. Those become the truly marketable skills and the valuable skills for an individual to have. So as we end the individual session, I want to leave you all with a roadmap of, if I was talking to a friend, going back to the essay concept of that we talked about at the start. If I was talking to a friend, if I was talking to a family member, as I talk to you all, what would I encourage you to do as individuals? What is your path as an individual? One, I think, is to experiment consistently. Use the tools, try something new, throw a problem at it, see what happens. I think it's very important and interesting to explore creative challenges when you think about having to create a picture. Maybe you like poetry. Think about a poem you would like. One of the things I do that I was talking about earlier today is I use AI, particularly ChatGPT, sometimes to tell my daughter a bedtime story. I asked her, what do you want to hear about tonight? Right. And you can bring in Superman and the Paw Patrol and my daughter Avery all together into a really engaging story. So don't just experiment with the tools, experiment creatively. Think about things that you have not been able to do and try it and see what you get. Second is treat AI like staff augmentation. What would you delegate? If you had tasks that you could delegate, what would you delegate? What would you have an artificial intelligence assistant support you at? Maybe it's coming up with a travel itinerary. Maybe it's helping you with meal prep for the week and thinking about, I have these ingredients in my fridge. What can I create? Maybe it's thinking about finances. One of the things I would say is if you do something like that, most of these services, you can turn off model training. If you're going to put your own financial data in or health data or things like that, make sure you go into settings and turn off model training. End of PSA. Explore new interfaces. These change all the time. I was talking about Claude Cowork. It's a fairly recent tool. There are new interfaces. There are new ways of engaging with video, engaging with audio. Try those out. Continue to experiment. And really the meta theme for all of this is to stay curious and maintain agency. There is a theory of sort of a K-shaped economy, of a divergence of people who have learned how to use AI tools to magnify themselves and those who have not, and that creating an economic divergence. And you want to make sure you're on the top side. You're on the top side of the K. Or in some cases that your investment portfolio is well aligned with the top side of the K, so you can hang out at the beach. So let's talk about the institutions. Let's talk about higher ed in the AI era. The churn, some of the things we see, some of the challenges we see, I think are no more visible in higher ed than in higher ed. Across the country, universities are signing large contracts with technology companies. At the same time, students are already using these tools on their own. Many students that I've talked to at various universities around the country prefer to use the consumer tools over the institution provided tools. Many different institutions have data that proves that out. When you talk to students, I think in some cases they believe that the university is spying on them and what they're using AI for. As someone who has worked in university IT departments and has a lot of friends who work in university IT departments, they're not staffed or resourced to do that. But you know, believe what you want to believe. But one dynamic is real to me, and at times it's concerning to me, which is that higher ed is investing heavily in artificial intelligence while we're still figuring out how people actually want to use it and how best to use it. And if that sounds familiar, if you're a technologist or an academic or an administrator, it's because this happens all the time. One of the things I think we need to really make sure we do at our universities, at our institutions, is while things are moving very rapidly, think about what we have learned from other technology changes. Think about the impacts of those and think about how we apply them so we don't make the same mistakes again. when we talk about a liberal arts institution like Mary Washington, one of the democratic reasons that we require people to learn history is because history repeats itself. And right, Jeff?
Yeah.
All right.
Sometimes with a different accent.
Yes, fair enough. Fair enough. So how do we learn from history to not make the same mistakes again, but also to be better the next time when we're confronted with a challenge? If I think about my own experience with technology, when I became heavily involved with technology in the research and higher education space, it was around cloud computing, SaaS and infrastructure as a service. And I remember, I don't want to throw too much shade here, but you give me a microphone and a room. I remember being at the university in 2007, 2008, 2009, and the idea of moving email from out of a server in the George Washington basement, that is a building that has some rain issues sometimes, that did not have the best cabling, that had some challenges. That was really scary. That was really scary. It was really controversial. The idea that someone else would manage our email. I don't think that is today. We spent a lot of time, I was in conversations as a student and as an administrator, working through that process, working through some of that scar tissue about, could I really give my email to Microsoft or to Google, or were bad things going to happen? And I think we have to think about how we don't repeat that. One of the biggest lessons for me in cloud computing on the infrastructure side is in the early 2010s, most universities made a decision on which cloud platform they were going to adopt. It was typically either Amazon or Microsoft, Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. And universities spent a lot of time architecting the design around, this is our cloud. This is our vendor cloud solution that we're going to use. But what happened? Faculty got grants that required them to use other cloud services. Cloud services started to develop unique and differentiating capabilities in different research disciplines. Think about genomics or biomedical. The data in which some of the cloud services had access to. I think about some of the Google data sets, think about Google Earth and some of the other data sets that Google maintains, starting to provide unique capabilities and unique values that ultimately meant universities today have Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and maybe many other infrastructure providers. Still to this day, I was talking about the early 10s in 2026, many universities are still figuring out how to design their multi-cloud strategy, how to ensure there are common policies across the various clouds, how to determine there's common visibility across clouds, common security controls, common user experience, common ways to bill or charge back, or to enable user access or to log in. We're still working on that in 2026. Because we designed from the proposition that this was going to be the service we use. And I think we know in higher ed, as much as we would like to say we're only going to buy one thing because that's economical, that's better, that students, faculty, staff, administrators, the broader community here at Mary Washington, you all as individuals are going to use ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini. I know you use Copilot here. Maybe even Grok. How do we design for a multimodal world? I think that's a real challenge for institutions today, which is how do we enable access? It's not just a democratization piece. It's not just ensuring that each faculty member or each student has access to the most performant models. It's also thinking about how do we create a culture that brings in all these various different capabilities. And I think there's still time to design that right. So when I go talk to institutions around the country, that's something I like to bring up. Start from a design principle that it's going to be yes and for all of these various models. ChatGPT excels at voice. Google Gemini excels at multimodal. Claude excels at coding and data analysis. And there are going to be reasons to use all of these various models. It's one of the reasons I often, many times encourage people to think very hard before writing a 6 or 7 figure check at a university to invest in AI. While I still say as a major proponent. I think ultimately what drives multiple uses of AI at an institution is a culture. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the historical culture at the University of Mary Washington. Innovation is not a product you buy. I was telling people earlier today, I think in two different sessions, that a couple of months ago, the New York Times ran an article that the title was something along the lines of "Welcome to College, here's ChatGPT." And it was a great morning for me when I started reading that article. My wife took my 5-year-old and 2-year-old to the playground. I made a bacon, egg, and cheese. I had a nice cup of coffee, and I made the mistake of opening my iPad to read the New York Times. This is not a commercial or a diss for the New York Times. And in that article, the impression that I left with as the reader, as someone who knew most of the people quoted in the article, who knows what's going on at most of the institutions featured in that article, was that if you are not signing a sort of wall-to-wall contract and investing in a foundation model provider at your university for all faculty, staff, and students, that you're not innovative. That was the impression I took away from that article. And I think that's so wrong. Innovation is not a product you buy. It's a behavior you practice. And when I think about the University of Mary Washington, one of the things I genuinely admire about the university is the university has a history of practicing this. You think about some of the examples up here, UMW blogs of bringing access to the ability for students to disseminate their knowledge, their opinions, showcase their projects, a domain of one's own, developing a digital identity for students, getting access into, even in some cases, the back end of how web development works. Mary Washington was one of the first universities outside the state of Utah where Instructure's Canvas product came from to adopt the service. That was a bold decision at the time to adopt an open source LMS platform that had a very tiny portion of market share that today dominates the market share. And of course, investing in things like the Center for AI and Liberal Arts. There's a culture here of investing in the conversation, in the openness. And I think if we pair it with doing and we pair it with access, if we pair it with the sense of let's try and see what happens rather than let's wait and find out what someone else does, I think UMW is going to be in a nice position as an institution. And I'll just reiterate, UMW did not become an innovative institution in some of these cases by buying it. It became innovative by practicing it, by experimenting, by trying things, by investing in open source technologies that had a fairly low barrier to entry. And I think that experimentation, that ability to think about what's available and how best to use it, is very important. And I think for AI, we have the opportunity not only to leverage open source technologies, not only to leverage technologies that the organization has already invested in, but to think about how the broader community has invested in technologies and ways to identify synergies there. One of the things that I think is an institutional concern, I hear it on podcasts, I read it in articles. The aforementioned New York Times has certainly brought it up. The idea that AI is going to replace higher education. Has anyone heard that? All right. couple people. When I started to, so I don't believe that. I didn't believe that before I thought it. I think it's going to change higher education. But when I started to prepare this talk, I thought, surely that conversation has happened before. Wait a minute. I remember when we said that we weren't going to come back to campus in the COVID era. Now we have online classes. We figured it out. It'll lower the cost. No need to come back to campus. Well, that didn't happen. I think we learned things from online courses. I think we learned about ways to create access, to create new programs, to engage learners in different spaces, to bring more diverse communities together that are very valuable. But it did not replace the academy, did not replace the institution. I totally forgot about MOOCs. Then you forgot about MOOCs. Like MOOCs are going to be the thing, right? And they weren't. And I have a quote up here from Clayton Christensen during the MOOC era where he said that half of the U.S. universities may be bankrupt. Didn't happen. The internet, Peter Drucker said universities will not survive the internet. I went all the way back, and hopefully this is not AI hallucinating, but it could be. I don't know. Thomas Edison on film said that books would become obsolete. Thomas Edison might be right about books with AI. I know some of you have recently written books, so sorry about that. But I do think I do think the increased ability to use AI, to use generative AI to generate voice, to generate video, the physical book may become increasingly obsolete. The content is still very important. What changes is the ability for the consumer of knowledge to consume that knowledge in a way that really resonates with them. So I don't think higher ed's going away. I do think it's going to change. One of the things I've been thinking about ever really since Anand asked me to take on this role is, what is the role of the liberal arts institution in an era of AI? And why do liberal arts institutions matter in an era of AI? And I think there's a couple of things I will highlight. The skills, the opportunities to learn things like critical thinking, the ability to interrogate information, ethical inquiry, thinking about what is ethical. We're at a university that has a longstanding honor code, and thinking about civic participation. Anytime there's a societal shift, it's very important for a functioning democracy that individuals are involved and engaged in managing that shift. We do not want this technology to drive the future. We want the humans. We want the citizens of the United States in our country to drive what the future is, not the technology. I'll come back to critical thinking because I think it's really important. I think it's maybe one of the most important things an institution can do today, which is when anyone can produce voice, anyone can produce video, anyone can produce images, anyone can produce a pretty polished newscast. How do you interrogate truth? How do you interrogate what is factual versus what is made up? As educators, as consumers of information, as students, that's the big challenge that's in front of us. And whether you're a student in a class, whether you're a worker, whether you're a citizen, thinking about how I'm going to be prepared to interrogate the information I've seen, and determine whether it's factual, it is going to be increasingly important. So on the institutional roadmap, what do I think institutions should do? I think it's similar to what I think people should do. Encourage experimentation. Invest in literacy. This is a learning challenge. It is not an economic challenge. That's the next slide. Design for multimodal ecosystems. I think that's important for individuals as well. Use different services, experiment. I think what's really important for a liberal arts institution like Mary Washington is how do we preserve a residential liberal arts experience? That doesn't have to be everything, but it is a great incubator of learning and experience and being human that ultimately AI cannot feel. I want to move. I know I'm getting long, so I'm going to move through the societal impact quicker. But what I want to talk to you about is a doomsday scenario I read about recently. And this comes from a report from the Citrini Research Group. And what the Citrini Research Group report does is it writes a report as in analyzing a hypothetical situation of something that might happen. And in this case, they write about a hypothetical situation of what the economy looks like heading into 2028. And what the report suggests is a rapid growth in the stock market, a rapid growth in GDP, traditional economic indicators growing at the same time where real wages stagnate, unemployment skyrockets. The benefit goes to the corporations that control the models, that control the technology, that control the output, while the individuals, particularly individuals in the middle, what we call the intermediates, get squeezed out. Mediation and what is a middleman type role collapses. AI agents are able to negotiate contracts amongst each other. AI agents are able to negotiate mortgage rates. They're able to buy a house. They're able to intermediate financial transactions. It drives the cost of that down to the cost of electricity instead of the cost of the human. And that ultimately leads to huge unemployment, which ultimately means much of the labor market cannot be sustained. The scenario they call this is ghost GDP. The idea that the core economy does very well because we're producing technology, corporations are driving revenue, but the individual does not have the benefit. We know that machines don't buy coffee, they don't buy cars, they don't buy houses. And we know that the circulation of wealth, the circulation of income, the ability to spend, the ability to consume does drive our democratic experiment. I think this scenario is why only 38% of Americans view AI favorably. There are only a few things that Americans view more unfavorably than AI right now, Congress being one of them. And I think it's a real concern about who captures the value when it comes to these services. Is it the workers? Is it the owners of the capital and the infrastructure? Is it society? One thing I'll posit, I mentioned earlier to a group today, like, well, if you had some economics students, I would have them study this. If machines are increasingly performing the work, do we eventually need to rethink how we tax the output of work for societal benefit? I read an article recently where it talked about introducing a token tax, the idea that you're taxing the use of AI tokens, much like you tax income or work. I think that's a really interesting idea. It's going to come back and get me one day on video that I said, hey, Sean was pro taxes. But I think it's an interesting idea as we think about what metrics are quantifying work. Concerns about job displacement, privacy, autonomy are rising. And these force us, I think, to think through important questions. But I do want to talk, and I'm going to go to the societal roadmap here. I do want to talk about what I think could be a positive outcome for AI, for our society. Each generation in our country has had the responsibility to think about how we grow equity in our country, how we grow our society, how we advance technology, how we advance our society. And I do think there is a scenario where AI continues to advance that arc, where it doesn't limit it. AI certainly represents the risk of concentrating enormous power in a few, but it also has the opportunity to democratize access. You can imagine a student anywhere in this country, a small town, a rural community, a city, any neighborhood with access to an internet connection, or increasingly to a cell phone connection. If that student has an idea, a laptop, and access to basic AI tools, suddenly they have the opportunity to create an entire company. They can build software, design a product, analyze a market, launch a business. For the first time in history, entrepreneurship may require a little more than an idea, access to a computer, the internet, and tokens. That's an increasingly democratizing force if we choose to make it one. Technology does not automatically create equality, and societies need to decide whether technology is going to expand opportunity or constrain it. That brings me to our societal roadmap slide. And this may be the simplest, but it's the most important of all. First, I think it's important that all of us think about how we participate in our democracy, in the democratic debate. Technology governance is going to require direct civic engagement, not just technologists. I don't think the government is ready for what is coming in this country or in many countries in the world. But we as citizens can help push for regulations around privacy, for access, for other things that are extremely important. Protecting democratic institutions like a university, like a press, access to information becomes vitally important. And third is to intentionally shape the future. We all have a role in building the future we want it to be, and we can choose a vision and act towards a vision that concentrates the power of this very powerful technology in a few, or one that democratizes it and allows a new generation of builders and a new generation of technology. But it's us who gets to shape society, not technology's role to shape society. So I want to end here and open it up for questions I quoted the article from Steve Yeagy about the energy vampires. And I want to end with something that I think is very important. And it's important on a day like today where it is absolutely beautiful outside. Go to Ball Circle and touch a blade of grass as you leave. AI will never be able to do that. AI will never be able to have that human experience, to have the sense of empathy, to have the sense of creativity, to feel the joy, to feel the sadness, to feel the triumph that you all feel. That's what makes us uniquely human. And it's incumbent on us to leverage what makes us uniquely human to drive forward technology in this era of rapid change. So thank you very much. And I appreciate you all coming.
Thank you for that, Sean. This is a fantastic talk, a lot to think about. I'm happy to come around with the microphone. Let me just give you a starter question. You mentioned the backlash, and some recent polls show that AI is even less popular than ICE currently. And this is certainly an issue that is going to be a major campaign issue during the midterm elections. For those people that are opposed to AI, can we stop it? Do you see movements for this? Is it something that people, through a popular movement, could actually stop the development of AI because of some of these concerns?
So you went there with that federal agency. I went for Congress. Congress is like the easy layup. Everyone agrees with that typically. Here's what I would say about that. I take two angles at that. Number one, I would say when you think about the amount of money that the federal government is investing in AI, When you think about some of the AI initiatives that are being driven out of the federal government, they are some of the very few things that the Trump administration started in Trump's first term, the Biden administration doubled down on, and Trump in his second term tripled down on. There are very few things that are bipartisan right now. And US AI competitiveness, winning an AI war, is one of those things that is uniquely bipartisan right now. So I don't see a systemic shift that says, whoa, stop. I give people like Dario Amodei. Dario Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic. I give a lot of credit, whether it's sort of contrived for business reasons or real, for saying, no, let's not push the bounds of AI for things like mass surveillance or autonomous warfighting drones yet. Right? Assuming you never know what'll happen. But I could see it slowing down. I do not see it stopping. What I would, and I think I articulated what I would like to see as an individual, as someone who's a critical consumer of content around this, is getting more civic engagement. It's part of why I talked about it. Towards having much more difficult and much more critical conversations about what does the future look like? What does the future about the job market look like? What does the future of income look like? What does the future of work look like? Obviously, I think the conversation's already started about what does the future of war look like. So that is a conversation that I hope does get injected into politics. Because I think it's a healthy conversation for us to have and for people to have to go out and talk to their constituents and present ideas on. I have to imagine the next presidential race, these issues. I don't know if it'll catch this congressional cycle as much. Certainly the defense or war related ones will. But I would have to imagine when you get to the next presidential race, you start to talk about what does universal basic income look like if there is going to be a mass job displacement. What do changing tax rates look like? What is access, ubiquity of access to some of these services look like, which we have historically invested in as a country, whether it's with phones or the internet or in sort of providing access to our citizens to critical technologies.
It's excellent. Thank you. I know we're running over, but we have time for probably a couple of quick questions. And then I'm sure Sean will stick around a little later if we have some more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, great. Very much. Thank you so much. Talk about what Jeff Hinton is talking about. He talks about boundaries. Jeff Hinton. We started talking about boundaries and how far away we are from this stuff getting so far out of control. It's telling us what to do.
Yeah. So I by no means consider myself an expert in residence in identifying where those boundaries are. Within AI, I think that's certainly an emerging area, and that's some of the, when you look at sort of the battle between Anthropic and the Department of Defense or Department of War, that really is about those boundaries and who gets to dictate those boundaries. So I guess I'm encouraged that we're still in a place where humans get to dictate those boundaries. There are certainly, scenarios that you're talking about of, hey, AI evolves to the point where it's making the decisions for us. I think we have enough agency that we can stop that. But that's a choice for people. That's a choice for the people who control. There's a very small number of people who control the AI systems. It's a choice for them, and it's a choice for all of us on whether, maybe because it's easy, we dictate our agency, our decision-making authority to an artificial intelligence, or whether we preserve it. I think it's vitally important we preserve it.
Thank you, Sean, for this wonderful talk. I have a question about one of your slides. You said it increases productivity by 41% or whatever. And the next topic that you mentioned was burnout increases 37%. How does it, is it contradictory?
Yeah, I'll have to look at the specific data. I think what ends up what I've experienced, what ends up happening, is what ends up, I think, often happening when there's productivity is, an individual worker in this case tends to load shed into their personal time, tends to spend more of their personal time that are not 9 to 5 into working. So productivity continues to gain, but you're getting tired. You're not getting that relaxing time. So it probably does at some point. Those two probably do inverse, right? But I think right now we're seeing that massive productivity gain. But I have to look more specifically at the data I was citing.
We have time maybe for one more. There's another question. Okay.
You mentioned the idea that a management function can become one person. One person can be marketing, one person can be whatever else. The use of the term echo chamber is pretty common nowadays. When you only have one point of view feeding a system that is designed to echo back that, you can end up with somebody who can create massive disastrous results. And from the top of the AI food chain with that very few small group of people down to the collapsing economy where you put everything within one person's control who uses his echo chamber to create this vision. I think that's probably the scariest thing I'm aware of. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Thomas. I want to riff off it in one example. I was recently preparing to do an interview, and I was using voice mode on ChatGPT, and it was like, ask me questions. Go through and I answer the question, and it says, "Wow, Sean, that's such a great answer. You can really tell that it was so self-aggrandizing. It was so self-aggrandizing, I got mad at it and started to say, you don't talk to me like that. Like that's not the help I need, right? I'm looking for critical feedback when I'm preparing to be interviewed. I mean, at some point you're preparing to be interviewed, you want to be lifted up. You want to go in with that confident, approach, but I was in the preparation cycle of like rip what I'm saying apart, challenge everything I'm saying. And it didn't do that. I think some of that comes into when we think about critical consumers of information and critical thinkers. If you tell some of these systems to challenge my ideas, if you're very specific about like, here's what I think we should do, push back, let's ideate, let's have a conversation about it. I've actually found that to be effective at times where it's like, oh, I didn't think of that, or, oh, I was wrong. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the value of, the human. I talk about this on my team, sometimes in my own leadership style of the people I value the most as sort of my direct reports on my team are the people who will tell me I'm fully, or that I'm wrong, and we'll still be friends. Still go out to dinner afterwards. We'll still talk the next day. People that'll challenge you. I'll just say from my experience as an end user, unless you ask to be challenged, you're absolutely right that you're not challenged. And it does create an echo chamber that can very quickly become self-aggrandizing, and lead to a feeling of self-importance, particularly when you think about, oh, here's my marketing glossy, and here's my budget, and and I did this all one day. Aren't I fantastic? Because no one ever told me it was bad. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a hugely important thing for people to think about.
Not to sound like ChatGPT, but that was a great answer. That was fantastic.
The thing that I'm most concerned about, it's linking to your beginning comments and the last comment you made. Go out and touch the grass. Things that AI can't do. My biggest concern is generated as a consequence of the greater bifurcation of society.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have the access, those who do not, those who have resources that is not. the whole DEI issue that we're having in society in the broader sense, as AI is used and everything from getting on planes and so on, how people of color are disadvantaged to by the configurations that we're seeing. What are your thoughts in terms of how to improve accessibility in these ways that don't disadvantage so many people?
Yeah.
We have AI reading applications for college admissions.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that I immediately go to. One would be, and we were talking about this with some of the computer science faculty earlier, is actually helping people to understand how the models are trained, how they learn. So if it is true, I don't think it's debatable, that if you inject a bias into a model's training data, that bias tends to get reinforced and perpetuated over time. So one of the things I think, foundation model companies should think about, but also particularly academic institutions we want to think about, is critically thinking about the training data sets, what data we're using for training, and how we can sort of, I hate to say put more data in, but think about using different data to train models. Also getting back to the previous question, thinking about how do we, through reinforcement learning, teach models to challenge themselves and challenge their own assumptions to make sure they're doing something that's correct. To the equity and access thing, one of the things where I think higher ed could play a really interesting role, is you hear all the time in media, in news articles, that their GPUs are a scarce resource. GPUs, graphics processing units, they are the chips that train and run AI models, that they're a scarce resource. When you go out and talk to many universities, there's actually excess capacity there. It's similar to, if you think about the arms race around buildings in a university, where we all had to have the nicest buildings to attract students. Now you all have to have the most performant GPUs to attract researchers. Is there a way for the academy, for higher education, to take a leadership role in providing access to open source models that sit on those resources and make them available to the broader society, so that you don't get that K curve that I was talking about of the haves and the have-nots? I think one of the, I talked about, I've done taxes, you had me do immigration, and now I'm going to do China. So if I don't make it home to DC tonight, they'll know. One of the things that I think China has done a very good job at now, are they stealing IP? Are they doing it fairly? There's a lot of questions there, but in putting out open source models, in putting out models that people can run on their MacBook, or that have a very low infrastructure cost. And I think there's a role for higher education to play in making models, regardless of country of origin, in making models available to the broader society, to students, both in higher education, but in K-12, to citizens, to the communities in which they live in. Pitt, the University of Pittsburgh, is doing something now in the city of Pittsburgh that's like that, providing access to models out to the citizens of the city. My hope would be in having organizations, mission-driven organizations like higher ed, take a leadership role in that regard, that we have the second vision I talked about, that, a 13-year-old living down, Sunken Road or whatever has the ability to create a company because they have a brilliant idea and the access to do it. I think that's a way, that's possible.